Lesson 17, I will solve additive compare word problems modeled with tape diagrams. So solving additive compare word problems just means that we are comparing two somethings in each word problem. And we're going to use the additive comparison to solve them using tape diagrams. Now this lesson is going to be a little bit different because we're not going to be using our math journal. As a matter of fact, you need to go ahead and get your Lesson 17 problem set and follow along with the video. Okay, so if you follow along with me, you'll notice that this is the very first problem on your problem set. So we're going to go ahead and solve it together. So I want you to read this question with me. Sean's school raised $32,587. Leslie's school raised $18,749. How much more money did Sean's school raise? And I want you to ask yourselves the following questions. Can you draw something? What can you draw? What conclusions can you make from your drawing? So I want you to think about when you're thinking about tape diagrams, can you draw two tape diagrams to compare the amount of money that Sean's school raised to the amount of money Leslie's school raised? Now, I want you to take a look at your tape diagram that you drew. Can you write a number sentence? A number sentence to solve the problem to tell how much more money did Sean's school raise. You can come up with a number sentence. I want you to go ahead and solve it. If you can't come up with one, you can follow along with me. Now, if you did come up with a number sentence and you solved it, I want you to estimate to check your answer for reasonableness and write your answer as a statement. Again, if you're stuck, don't panic. You can follow along with me and I'll show you what to do. But if you're not stuck, pause the video and go for it. Okay, was this your answer? I want you to notice the tape diagram. So S obviously is going to stand for Sean, L stands for Leslie. So here's how much money Sean's school raised. Notice that the tape diagram is longer for Sean's because he raised more money. There's Leslie's. Now what we're trying to figure out is how much more. So that's what M represents. How much more money? So if I can figure out how much to add to Leslie's to get to Sean's amount, then I will have my answer. So in order to do that, I use subtraction. You can see here that I was not ready to subtract in the ones, so I had to decompose. And I was not ready to subtract in the hundreds, so I had to decompose. And I was not ready to subtract in the thousands, so I had to decompose. So Sean's school raised $13,838 more than Leslie's school. And the only thing this does not show is checking for reasonableness. Now we're going to estimate. So if I said that Sean's school raised about $30,000 and Leslie's school raised about $20,000, and I two, then I would get an answer of $10,000. So if my estimate is $10,000 and my actual answer is $13,000, I would say that my answer is reasonable. Once you get really good at estimating, you should be able to just do this in your head and you could think, does my answer make sense? And yes, it does. It would not make sense if you had added these two together and you had said $50,000. It wouldn't make sense to say that Sean's school raised $50,000 more than Leslie's school because he didn't even raise $50,000. Let's try another one. Again, let's read and let's see if we can draw something. At a parade, 97,853 people sat in the bleachers. 388,554 people stood along the street. How many fewer people were in the bleachers than standing along the street? So again, I want you to think to yourself. It says work with your partner. If you have a partner, you and your partner can work together. But if you're doing this by yourself, just continue by yourself. Can you draw something? What can you draw? What conclusions can you make from your drawing? So I would use a tape diagram to represent this problem. If you know how to draw a tape diagram to represent this, go ahead and do it. If not, again, you can stay tuned and follow along. If you drew your tape diagram, I want you to write a number statement or actually that just means a math problem from your diagram to solve the problem. What math problem would you use to figure out how many fewer people were in the bleachers than standing along the street? Estimate to see if your answer makes sense. And if your answer does make sense, go ahead and write your answer as a statement. This is your answer. So you can see that B stands for bleachers. This is how many people in the parade were in the bleachers, you can see it's much smaller than how many people were standing on the street. So we're trying to figure out how many fewer people were in the bleachers. So again, if I can figure out what I have to add to 97,853 to get 388,000, then I'm going to have my answer. So the easiest way to figure this out would be where I decompose. The only thing this doesn't show is my estimate. You could have rounded to whatever you wanted to. I would have said 100,000 people were on the street and about 100,000 bleachers. So that would mean that there was about 300,000 fewer people in the bleachers. And since this is really close to my actual answer, I would say that my actual answer does make sense. And again, this is my statement. This isn't the only way that you could have written your statement. As long as it answers the question, how many fewer people were in the bleachers than standing along the street, then it would be correct. One more. Hippos weighed 5,201 kilograms together. The female weighed 2,038 kilograms. How much more did the male weigh than the female? So again, I want you to ask yourselves, can you draw something? What can you draw? And what conclusions can you make from your drawing? Then I want you to write a number statement from your diagram to solve. By yourself, you should be pausing the video, and then when you're ready, if you're still confused, you can follow along with me. You use an estimate to check your answer to see if it makes sense, and then I want you to write your answer after that. Here's your answer. So you see here, here's the female. She weighed 2,038 kilograms, and it says here that the pair of hippos together weighed 5,201. That's a little bit different than what we've had before. So this bracket means that when you add these two together, you get 5,201 kilograms. So I want to know how much more did the male weigh than the female. So I know that this section right here of the male is 2,030. Get upset when you can't read my handwriting. 2,038 kilograms. And I'm trying to figure out this right here. But I don't know anything about the male other than this is 2,038. And I know the female weighs 2,038. And I'm trying to figure out this part right here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the total amount that they weigh together, and I'm going to subtract this 2,038. That gives me 3,163 pounds. So what that tells me is that the male altogether weighed 3,163 kilograms. Excuse me, I keep saying. The question doesn't say how much does the male weigh. It says how much more. So that's why this is a multi-step pattern. So you can see I had to take the weight of the male and subtract the weight of the female to find out how much more. So the male weighed 1,000 kilograms more. I want to see if I can use estimation to see if this makes sense. So together they weighed about 5,000. The female weighed about 2,000 kilograms. So that means that the male weighed about 3,000 kilograms. Let's see how much more that is. So 3,000, 2,000 that the female weighs is 1,000 kilograms. So my estimate would be that the male weighed about 1,000 kilograms more. And that's pretty much what I got. So that's a reason. Okay, copper wire was 240 meters long. After 60 meters was cut off, it was double the length of a steel wire. How much longer was the copper wire than the steel wire at first? Whew, that's a little bit confusing, isn't it? So the first thing I want you to do is I want you to think, can you draw something? This will help to alleviate the confusion. So think about how long the copper wire is. And then I want you to think about how long it was after 60 millimeters was cut off. And that tells you that after the 60 millimeters was cut off, it was double the length of the steel wire. So I want to know how much longer was the copper wire than the steel wire at first. So if you think you can figure it out, go ahead and draw your tape diagram. And then if you've figured out how to draw your tape diagram, I want you to write your number sentence or your number statement and solve it. it says compare your answer to another team's, but don't worry about that. I want you to next think about estimate to check to see if your answer makes sense. And if your answer makes sense, go ahead and write your answer. That's your answer. So I want you to notice my tape diagram. So obviously C stands for copper. The total was 240 meters long. 60 meters was cut off. It was double the length of the steel wire. There was the copper wire than the steel wire. The first thing I had to do was take away the 60 to get me 180. So that's how much the copper wire was after 60 meters was cut off. So that tells me that this was double the steel wire. So if this is double, then that means that the steel wire was 90 meters, because 90 and 90 is 180. So now to figure out how much longer it was in the steel wire, I had to subtract. So once I did that, I got 150. So at first, the copper wire was 150 meters longer than the steel wire at first. Okay, so if I wanted to check this for reasonableness, I could say that the copper wire was about 200, and they took off. I'm going to go ahead and take off 60, and I'll tell you why. Because that's going to leave 140, and I know that 140 can be divided in half, equals 70. So that would mean that the steel wire was about 70. So if I took 200 minus 70, that would give me about 140, which is really close to my answer. So that tells me that that answer is pretty reasonable. Okay, so we've already completed our problem set together. So now you're ready for your exit slip. Good luck.